Our next speaker is a very, very, very awesome guy. We actually met at a conference, I think, some conference. We had a bit too many drinks, found out we know Japanese. He lived in Japan, started speaking Japanese. I can only really do that when I'm drunk, so we had a good time. Raj is been involved in a lot of different projects in Japan. So he's worked with Konami, worked with Beatmania and Rhythmania, Sega's Racer, Capcom Resident Evil 2, MTV's hit The World of the Golden Eggs, Victor Entertainment's Gungrave and Shenmue, anime movies, Cowboy Bebop, Ghost in the Shell, and lots of other things. So he's very, very talented, really awesome, wonderful guy. To watashi no tomodachi, Ramaya-san.
Thanks for that wonderful intro, Aaron. It's fantastic. So as Aaron mentioned, I lived in Japan for about 20 years of my life. And I've just recently moved over to the Bay Area from Japan and set up my own little studio here, and I'm doing some work for different companies. And I'm also teaching music production, sound design at the Academy of Art University here in San Francisco, very close by. After 20 years in Japan, coming here and rebooting was an interesting experience, and getting to know what's going on here in America as opposed to Japan, which is a very different experience actually. In Japan, people don't stream, for one thing. It's very unusual to see anybody streaming. People live on their mobile devices. They don't really go home to play games. They play games on their mobile devices. Getting together with your friends at somebody's house is unheard of. It just doesn't happen. People do not go to each other's homes to play games. So console games they're there, but it's more of a solitary experience. The actual interaction with other people comes on being on the train, being in a taxi, and just walking around, hanging out in different places. So it's a very, very, very different world from what we experience here. And so casual games are definitely a big part of everybody's life. And mobile games are a very, very big part of people's life. Anything mobile is absolutely Japan, as it was. So I want to take a look at a few things here to start with. Pac-Man to Resident Evil. Who remembers playing Pac-Man when they were a kid? Okay, you've given away your ages, so I think you're all like, right, okay, I'm probably older than all of you. So Pac-Man to Resident Evil, I remember playing Pac-Man and Space Invaders when I was a kid as well. And when we look, and today I don't want to focus on technical aspects because there's a lot of that going on. What I want to focus today on is music. And intrinsically that's what I am, a musician, even though I teach a lot of the technical aspects of music and music production, sound design for visual media. But today what I really want to talk about is music. And are there any musicians here? There you go. There you go. Okay, good. So today what I want to focus on is the music end of audio and how this really impacts our lives on so many different levels, because so many people talk about the technical stuff and I see people falling asleep at the back of the room, and that's cool, but we need to talk about something else, make things a little bit more interesting for you. So the music end of things to me is something that has become very interesting over the years. I started working on music for games about 15 years ago, and at that time Beatmania, Rhythmania, Guitar Mania, all these games were really big. And those are the initial things that I worked on. After time went by, one thing that I always focused on trying to get for myself was music publishing. Does anybody aware of what music publishing is? Right? So what music publishing intrinsically is your ability to retain your rights for your music and to be able to collect residuals and royalties off music over the long term. That didn't really happen initially for games, so I focused on doing other things for animation and for film and television. But gaming has come back big time, and it's huge here in the States, as it is in Japan. So what I've tried to do is get back into the gaming industry in a different way and approaching it more as a musician than as a technical person. So right now what I'm seeing a lot of as I make regular trips down to LA and talking to music supervisors is that everybody right now is looking at games as being the new rock stars of this millennium. People who compose for games, people who enjoy games are the new sort of top 40 of music nowadays. What you see on Billboard and what you see here on the radio isn't reflecting the real tastes of what people love nowadays. People really love Assassin's Creed. Now that's something that's probably top of the charts if there was a game music chart, but there isn't at the moment. But what we're seeing is a huge shift away from traditional forms of music, terrestrial music coming from radio and from television and from Billboard telling us what is the best music out there? What's number one? So now what's number one is essentially what people love. And people are able to choose freely what they love. And what happens nowadays is we have a whole new set of rock stars. And these rock stars are game music, they're game music people. So you guys are the new rock stars out there. So from the ghetto of teenage fanatics, I think 15 years ago, the people that really loved game music were few and far between in terms of being mainstream approachable. They were really, really undercover geeks. And even nowadays, we've come from sort of being geeks to becoming acceptable geeks. So now being a nerd is actually quite cool, and happy to hear that, and happy to say that. So I play a lot of animation conventions. At these anime conventions, people are focused on games as well as animation. So I get to interact a lot with people who are actually on the floor fans. I actually go out and perform songs that I've written for games, for animation conventions all over the world. So I literally fly out every second weekend and get to be in front of these people, see what they really love, see what really affects them, and see how much this music is a part of their lives. It's not just something that they listen to once in a while on the car radio. They live it. They live it, they breathe it, they love it so much that they want to be these people. They want to be these anime characters. They want to be these people, these characters inside the games. So the reach that this music has nowadays is so incredible. It affects people on a daily level. And we haven't had this kind of effect of music since probably the 60s and the 70s. The 60s and the 70s, people were Beatles fanatics. They were Led Zeppelin fanatics. They were the Who fanatics. That kind of disappeared in all the commercialism. But now what we're seeing, and what I'm seeing, is that people are becoming fanatics again. And game music has become an important part of people's lives. A very important part of people's lives. So what we're seeing now is game music has gone from becoming just like 8-bit bleeps and bloops from Pac-Man, Space Invaders, to full-on cinematic scores. And these full-on cinematic scores, of course, have a huge impact on people. But what happens is a lot of game developers don't realize the impact that this is having on the people that are playing these games. How important it is to pair the music with the game properly, correct? We're seeing a lot of things is audio takes the last it's the last rung on the ladder, right? And it should be, in my perspective, one of the first steps you should be taking, because music affects people in an incredibly heavy way, right? So just to exemplify this, can anybody name two of their top favorite songs? Top favorite song?
Are you talking about game songs?
Any song in general.
Well, Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Brothers for games.
Okay. Now, game music is so popular, and it's so much a part of our lives that it's something that we can't really separate from how we feel when we play a game. It's part of what we feel in the game. So let's take a look at this. Pac-Man 2. Oops, there we go. There. Yeah. Have I lost it?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Hang on one second here.
Went to sleep. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Once an afterthought, now a necessity is a music integral to creating a compelling game experience. As I mentioned, I think it is. It's something that creates an incredibly compelling game experience. If you take a horror movie and you mute the sound on a horror movie, it's no longer a horror movie, it's a comedy, correct? Right? So Dance Dance Revolution to Beatmania. So who's familiar with Dance Dance Revolution? Remember? One of the first sort of interactive games, right? Beatmania as well, Guitar Mania, Rhythm Mania. I actually, yeah. All these amazing games that make us feel something and make us interact with the game. It's such an important part of what we are and how we feel about games. And nowadays, game music is even taken apart in the Grammys, correct? Right? So now there's even a category in the Grammys for game music. So basically, game music has come into the mainstream. What's happening, what I'm seeing, and I'm kind of wondering why, I'm trying to help people overcome this, is why people don't put a more emphasis on the game music itself, right? The quality of game music as opposed to quantity. I mean, the technical aspects are very, very important, but the actual emotional content of the games is something that is very, very important. I understand the technical aspect of games. I even teach those things. But in reality, the emotional impact of the games is really, really dependent on the music that's created for the games. And it becomes so secondary in so many people's thinking that I'd love to change that. I'd like to work with people like Aaron who understand that game music should take the forefront on everything that is created in the game. It should be something that people think about right off the bat. Because people like, even directors like Quentin Tarantino, start with the soundtrack and shoot backwards from that situation. And as you see, a lot of Hollywood directors are very, 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 very successful doing it that way, because the pace of the music is created by the pace of the game can be created by the music, as opposed to the other way around. And I'm not sure, but anybody feel the same way, that it kind of compromises things when you have music that's created as an afterthought? What do you think? Right? So this is kind of a dilemma that I know that it's going to take time. It's going to take a grassroots effort to work on for people to understand how important this is. So I think what I want to do today is build a little bit of awareness of this situation, and also answer you questions, if I can, about what's going on in Japan and other places. So, as we mentioned, game music and the Grammys. As we move along, I'm a member of NARAS, which is the Grammy Association, and there are going to be more and more Grammy nominations for game music coming up. There's inevitable. It's an inevitable part of life nowadays. So as you can see, game music creators, game music lovers have a huge impact on the game industry as a whole. And it's going to do nothing but grow more and more and more. So what also we're seeing is a lot of music supervisors. Is everybody aware of what a music supervisor is? You know? Yes? Yeah? Okay. What a music supervisor is, can you tell us what it is? Correct, exactly. Yeah, so what is a music supervisor? So we have two different forms of music for games. One is work for hire, where people are hired to create music for games. Another form of music for games is music that's licensed for games. In other words, music that music supervisors clear and put onto games, which is a little bit different from a custom composition, which is something that's created specifically for a game. But both types of music for games are actually eligible for Grammy. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. So quality versus quantity. What happens nowadays is a lot of people end up using a lot of repetitive loops and a lot of repetitive sounds in games. So I think the important thing to realize right now in games is custom compositions are a super important part of any kind of games composition. What happens is if too much focus is placed on the actual technical end of the games and on using whatever material is available for games, there's a loss of actual impact in the games in the long run. What you have is a lot of sounds that people hear over and over again. And believe it or not, it actually reduces the quality of the actual game to a large degree. A lot of games require custom compositions, and custom compositions in the long term provide an impact and actually a sharing experience among all the fans. The fans can say, this is music that I loved, this is music that I follow this composer, I follow this game, and it creates a fan base of people who follow the music as well as the game. But when custom compositions don't come into play, the games, as I see them, and a lot of people see them, aren't really creating the maximum impact that they can create. In other words, they're basically repetitive cookie-cutter versions of the same thing. So we have the same sounds appearing over and over again. We have similar kinds of songs that are repeated over again. It's really something that has to be thought about and applied every time game music is created. So nowadays, game music in Hollywood, is it here to stay with standalone game soundtracks? Yes, I think so. Game soundtracks nowadays are standalone, and they can definitely be something that we can listen to without having to leave the game around. So that's a big difference from the initial 8-bit bleeps and bloops from Pac-Man and Space Invaders. We've actually game cinematic soundtracks that stand alone that people love just for the composers. And nowadays, I think that's something that creates two different revenue streams for all the games. The music for the games, as well as the games themselves. And that's a very interesting situation, as we have a variety of different ways to monetize games. So any questions so far? Okay. Oh, lost my PowerPoint again. Sorry about that. So heightening tension, manipulating mood, and drawing you into another world. As I mentioned before, if you mute a soundtrack for a horror movie, you end up with a comedy. So the impact of games in heightening mood and creating tension in the game is so incredibly important in what we hear in games. Anybody compose for games here other than Aaron? Okay, all right. And so what do you think is the most important part of composing for games? What'd you say is your? What's that?
Do no boring.
Do no boring.
Or annoying.
Or annoying. Here's something that comes up all the time: annoying, which is repeated all of it. And what do you think? What's the important parts about composing for games?
I think motion capturing.
Right, right. And so, what types of emotions are we trying to capture in games?
Tension.
So we need to say all this on the mic so it can get
Okay.
recorded for the web.
You want to capture, either tension or some kind of. Sometimes it's a feeling of running or flying, or
Right.
joy. You want exacerbation of fighting a boss, and then finally breaking through. All those things really
Right.
key into it.
So, how do we create those emotions in game soundtracks?
Me again, or you want someone else?
Oh, you again. It's fine.
Well, you have all these musical things that you can rely on, things that have been used in cinema before.
Right.
There's a lot of Bernard Herrmann. We can thank him for a lot of these things, and
Right.
John Williams, and there's
Hans
all
Zimmer.
these,
Mhm.
all these examples there that we can look to, and we have a lot of those musical tools in our chest to choose from.
Exactly. I mean, I agree with that totally. I mean, a lot of tricks of the trade. If we follow people like Hans Zimmer, we get to see exactly what he uses to create tension in soundtracks for Batman. It's the same kind of tension, same kind of mood changes that we can apply to game music, and that's really going back to the traditional roots of music and how music is used to manipulate people's moods during a game. And one other person wanted to say something. So you said, how do you create your own? How do you create moods in a game? How do you create tension?
Well, a lot of times what you're doing is you're checking out what the state of the game is.
Right.
So if you're stealthily walking around, you
Right.
have to sound sneaky.
Right.
And then somebody catches you, and there's surprise, and then
Right.
there's that tension level, which you have to ramp up a bit, and then
Right.
there's fight or flight.
Right.
And so it's interesting as a composer to be thinking non-linearly, and how do you make this score seamlessly pass between these different levels of tension, because you can't
Excellent. Mhm.
you can't ramp it up to like full flight and flight
Right.
from evade very easily. So a lot of those are the challenges that you get when you're trying to be emotional, because it's in a film, you have a scene
Right.
that's been meticulously crafted
Right.
to go from one point to the next. But when you're in a game, of course, things can change quickly.
Okay. So what are your top 3 favorite tricks that you use for composing?
Well, there's transitions. So how do you transition between one state to another state?
Okay.
And a lot of that has to do with how well you understand the implementation of the game music
Right.
into the game, and how much power you get.
Right.
Because we all have these wonderful tricks that we want to do,
Right.
but can we do them? Because what's going to be technically possible
Right.
on the developer end. So anyway,
Right.
But yeah, a lot of those tricks are basically creating a lot of times we do have to create loops, right?
Right.
So you try and create loops that have a little bit of several different loops that are built off of the same session,
Right.
that have a slight variance, and they can randomly go between them. So and using compound signatures and things like that, and just trying to shift things up a bit so it's not so boring.
Okay,
and
fantastic.
and it stays interesting, and it transitions well. So
Right.
there you go.
Excellent. Very, very good. That's some great advice. Any other composers in here want to add to that? Any tricks that they have, or any suggestions they have for creating great game music? No? Okay. A few other things I want to talk about today is the fact that game music and audio has changed so much and keeps changing so much, and that I feel that what we really need to do is focus on how we can create great audio, as you mentioned, using loops. We have to use loops at some points, but also understanding that hooks are an important part of game music. And hooks are something that a lot of, I'm not sure if composers realize this, or I'm sure they do, but aspiring composers realize that hooks are a very important part of game music. And can somebody tell me what a hook is? What's a hook, Art? What's a hook?
I think you call on me. Oh, you call on me?
Yep, yep.
Sorry. Well, are you talking about like a musical hook, like a theme?
Musical hook, exactly. yeah.
Well, in classical music, sometimes they call them motifs or a leitmotif, where you ascribe a certain a little melodic phrase that'll match something that's going on, maybe match to a character,
Right.
or maybe match to a situation.
Right,
And so I believe that's what you're talking about, right?
That's exactly it. So these motifs or hooks are a really integral part of what you do in composing for any kind of media, whether it's film, whether it's television, whether it's games, or whether it's anime. The hook is probably the most important thing. And what happens more often than not, is the hooks are generally missing in a lot of games. There's this fantastic quality of sound, there's a lot of great technology going on, but the hook is often not there. And without the hook, what happens without the hook? What happens? Does anybody know?
Nothing memorable.
Nothing memorable. Without anything memorable in a game, what happens to the actual game itself?
Not memorable.
Not memorable. The game disappears after a while, correct? But Mario Brothers, we remember that theme, right? Right? Super, super easy, but we remember that theme. That is an incredible hook. And that's a hook that lasts over time. So the last thing I want to leave you with today is the idea that hooks are a very, very, very important part of music. Whether you're in India composing, whether you're in Japan composing, whether in the US or Europe, wherever you are, hooks are so integral to music that we have to create hooks in order to bring people into the music, help them remember the game. And that's part of what we're doing. We're working together as a team with the game developer, with the company. So even though we're sometimes an afterthought as audio people, it is really important for us to create that hook in the game, in the music, so that people remember what's going on, and they come back later on and say, I remember that game, I remember that hook. And that's something that I think it's becoming more and more common, and I hope that all of you sort of strive towards creating hooks in all the music that you write. And it's such an incredibly difficult thing, yet important in music. Music is just music, but a hook in music is, as we said, something that creates memorable experiences. And after all, what this boils down to is a memorable experience. And without it, like I said, the game's not memorable. The whole experience is devalued. So any more questions or anything? Any comments? Yep.
I think you just mentioned that what's missing in a lot of game soundtracks is the hook, and
Right.
and I think that's correct. And I think we have to remember how that came about.
Right.
And I think that came about as a result of bad implementation.
Yeah.
There was a time when Facebook games, it was the go-to thing was make a 30-second loop and drop it in there.
Right.
And the producer says, okay, we're done. Good.
Right.
There's our audio. And that does such a disservice to the audio and the user, by bombarding them with that repetitive thing over and over again. The producer solution often was, well, you got to take out anything that is memorable and identifiable as a loop.
Right.
So we have to make it simpler and simpler and less eventful so that they won't recognize it as a loop and it won't drive them crazy.
Right. Right.
So I'm a big advocate of let's stop the madness. Let's fix the implementation thing.
Yeah.
Play these things. If it's got to be 30 seconds, then that's the limitation of the game.
Right.
Play it once.
Right.
Play it once per session and
Right.
just fade it out, and that's it. Make them
Right.
want more. But
Right. Yeah, very important point. Make them want more. There has to be something that draws people into the game. And you're right. Repetitive loops, what they do is basically bore people to death after a while. Right. That's really the effect that they have. They lull people into a sort of dreamlike state of trance when they're playing the game. There has to be something. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I want to add one thing to that, just one other thought. I do find, though, that sometimes you want the music to kind of fade to the background. Like, I
True.
find if I write a lot of melody, it sort of
Yeah.
overwhelms the game.
Right.
So, aside from just the looping thing, I think
Right.
you want to be careful about using too much melody.
I think it's not I agree. Too much melody can be something that actually confuses people a little bit as they're playing the game. But the correct notes at the right place create a hook, which is basically all you need. So less is more in most situations. It doesn't matter whether it's a TV commercial or it's a game soundtrack or it's for a documentary. The hook is the hook is the hook. It doesn't change no matter what you're doing. So.
Well, I'll just add in this little vein of hooks that, I argue with game developers all the time about, we want something less melodic, and I end up giving them a chord progression, and it just seems stupid at the end of the day. Like, why are you paying me to do this?
Right, yeah. Right.
But, I try to remind them, like, Super Mario Brothers annoyed the crap out of my mom and many other people. I'm sure it's just this loop that goes on and on. Now, it is longer than 30 seconds. Actually, it's a pretty long loop for that time. But it can be repetitive, and you can be aware of it looping. But if it's insidious enough in a good way,
Right, there you go.
then people it doesn't matter. No one will criticize Super Mario Brothers for having a crappy soundtrack.
Well, there you go. It's got a fantastic hook, right?
Yeah.
It's a very memorable hook. Not an annoying. Well, it's annoying, but it's memorably annoying.
So trying to convince game developers,
Yeah.
I think, is part of our roles as game sound designers,
Yeah.
saying, yeah, it's okay to notice that it's looping, but
Right.
it should be really pleasant and addictive rather
Right.
than like, I want to turn it off.
There you go. Addictive is a great word for it. It has to be addictive. If it's just annoying people, if it's a progression that annoys people and it's not addictive, then there you go. It's not doing its job. So I think that it comes all the way back again to hooks again. It comes right back to the whole concept of the hook. If there's too many notes, not enough notes, whatever it is, it has to be addictive, has to be compelling. And this is one word I use with my students. Whatever you write has to be compelling. If it's not compelling, people generally will forget about you. And that's not what you want to happen in game audio. You want them to remember you. You want them to remember the game. So unless the experience is compelling, people will generally forget about you. But if the experience is compelling, they will not only remember you, they may even worship you later on. So you will have fans, people that love you forever for great music and for games. So I guess the key word in all these, two key words I want to leave you with is hooks and being compelling, or that's 3 words. Hooks and being compelling. So 3 words I want to leave you with is those 3 things. And it's so, so important. It's something never to forget, because as we create music for games, this is the kind of the golden age of games. This is what I'm seeing anyway. Games are becoming such a part of mainstream life that it's the golden age. It's the 60s of games, basically, is what's going on right now. And as the games become popular, soundtrack music wasn't popular when movies started coming out. When talkies started coming out, soundtracks weren't popular either. The directors would just throw in whatever they had. They'd have somebody playing a ragtime piano. They'd throw it in there. They didn't care. And it's the same thing that's happening right now. But as the industry develops, we're going to become more and more of an important part of that industry. And the important thing now is to create quality over quantity, and focus on creating hooks and compelling music that will create fans, that will force the people who are developing the games and putting the games out to need us. So in essence, what we're doing is we're creating our own jobs as we go along, right? So if we start using loops and things that other people can use, if we degrade the experience, we're basically cutting our own throats as we go along. If we create fantastic music, the demand for fantastic music will arise from that, and we'll have more and more people demanding fantastic music. Correct? And so that's what I wanted to leave you with today. Thank you so much for having me.